What is going on, everybody? It is another episode of the 5280 podcast, and it is, as you could tell, not a full show. Me and Gage have you covered here tonight. Mike is he's not feeling well. He's under the weather, and for some reason, Glenn is out partying and not spending time with us. I don't know. I enjoy partying, but I also would enjoy having a party while recording with us. I don't know about you, Gage, but nonetheless, we got you all covered for sure.
What did Glenn say? He's at some casino event. So if Glenn is broadcasting from a cardboard box next week, we know why.
And wouldn't that be even like more incredible? Actually, like doing a show remotely from that VIP party. Like, how lit would that be?
Seriously, just do it at the slot machines, do it at the poker table.
Yeah,
Come on, man.
Yeah, that would actually make for a far more entertaining podcast than probably even talking about some NFL news or maybe some of the news that broke over the weekend, or maybe even some Broncos conversation. I mean, that would be incredible. I mean, like they say so often, or like what was the thing that Jay Leno would always do, like jaywalking, right? Ask some idiots down there in Vegas, like what exactly is the salary cap? Like it just gets some like complete like idiot answers, from some of the drunk weirdos down there in Vegas. That would make for some great podcast views, I gotta say.
Or do what the Tennessee Titans did and show an NFL team logo to oblivious idiots and ask them to name the NFL team. That was one of the best schedule release videos in the history of NFL media.
David asks, are you in a closet?
Yes, I actually am in a closet. That is my new setup. Got the shelving here. And it's like the perfect size. I was doing it in my room when I first moved in here, and it was echoey as hell. So I decided to come in here. We're going to put some padding up and kind of turn this into almost like a radio studio.
That is the plan. And by the way, David, your first comment here we'll address when we start talking about some of the Broncos news here a bit later in the show. So as we said, it's NFL news related, right? And the scouting combine did happen. We might briefly touch on that a little bit, but I think as I kind of mentioned last week, it's the combine is in essence a mini general manager and owners meeting, right? And so it's one where there's just a lot of news that is, certainly happening, right? Like, you get anything that is not just Broncos related, but I almost said NHL, NFL news, related. I mean, you might get some NHL news in there, who knows? It's a networking business. You never know. But there was all sorts of NFL news across the board, Gage.
Yes.
So I don't know where you want to begin because it was a packed filled weekend, that just went down. I mean, it was wild. So why don't you lead off first with probably some of the biggest news of the day, or I should say from the last few days, which was actually, I take it back. Let's start with the hottest one, which happened today with the Saquon Barkley extension first, and then we'll kind of work backwards from there. Saquon Barkley, obviously, he had 2 years on his deal. They added 2 more onto his deal, and in essence, reset the entire running back market, right?
Yep.
And so now they ended up signing him to a deal to 2 years of $41 million. Why don't you lead us off with that? I mean, I think that there's a pretty big takeaway for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been a paradigm shift in how the NFL values running backs. Excuse me. It all started off, of course, with Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley last year. Ever since Todd Gurley got paid and injuries led to that deal blowing up in the Rams' face, NFL teams have really devalued the running back position. And it's also been devalued in the draft as well. There have not been a whole lot of first-round running backs since Saquon Barkley to replicate his success. But now we're starting to see that complete shift where Ashton Genty is most likely going to go in the top 10. we have Saquon Barkley completely resetting the free agent market, where guys like Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, they're all paying very close attention to this. And also guys who are looking at extended like James Cook in Buffalo. This is very good news for them because it means that they're probably going to get even more money than they expected. So this is something that I'm very happy to see. Running backs deserve to be compensated because they take the biggest beating out of anybody in the NFL. So, yeah, man, I love it, and I'm very endorsive of it. I'm happy to see Saquon get his bag and future players coming off of this getting their bags as well.
One of the other takeaways, that I have about it, and just continuing your theme of the running back position is, look, there is no other position to kind of further what you're talking about. There is no other position in the NFL who touches the ball the most than the running back position. Obviously the quarterback is like the dominant one, but right after quarterback is the running back. And obviously it has been said, and obviously, Sean Payton has a history of not exactly having a running back one necessarily, but it's one where, they control a lot of the offenses when it's not just the quarterback. So I think you also are going to see a bit of an offensive shift a little bit again, right? Like you're going to be seeing teams probably value that running back position. They may have like a couple backs like the Detroit Lions, with Jahmyr Gibbs and, David Montgomery, but, they're going to control a fair amount of the offenses. And I think I cannot be happier in that because, look, I'm a huge fan of the Big Ten. So like, I'm just accustomed to seeing these offenses be run heavy, so it's just, I'm very excited for the idea that we might actually see some run heavy offenses now that are featured with running backs. It might be looking completely different than say the Big Ten offenses, but it'll be very run heavy, with these running backs. So, it's going to be exciting. I don't know what, I think it's fair to assume they're not going to be getting the $20 million worth of a contract, right? In terms of Aaron Jones and Najee Harris. But I do, it does make you wonder, what the contract is going to be, in terms of, those particular guys. Nick Chubb, I don't want to throw too much into there because of his tread on the tires and because of the injuries and everything. But I would venture to guess that, there might be some team out there that might want to offer, a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal of like 10 million, for like an Aaron Jones or a Najee Harris, in terms of the change of what Saquon Barkley was able to do. But it's certainly going to be a very interesting offseason surrounding that running back position, Gage.
Yeah, for sure. And it's been very well documented that the run game is back in a big way in the NFL, with these teams on defense starting to do a lot more of the shell coverages, the cover 2, cover 4, cover 6. That just naturally leaves you with one less body in the box to stop the run. So teams are going to run the football on you. And that has been the case in the NFL for these last several years. And we're starting to see the running back position again become more valued. And I think a part of that is due to the run game itself starting to become more valued across the NFL.
Yeah, let's keep it in the NFC East here a little bit. So the Cowboys are kind of making some waves here of late. The rumor certainly that has been coming out in the sense is that they don't know whether or not they're going to be keeping everyone. And of course, when it means everyone, it is their own free agents. Well, I think that maybe that tide might be changing here a little bit, Gage, because when you look at some of the moves that they were able to make, I think they were able to kind of keep, some of their own free agents. They ended up signing Oda Ezigbo, to the massive contract extension, who was actually going to end up being one of the top defensive linemen on the market at such a young age. So they ended up signing him to a contract extension, basically just avoiding, the franchise tag altogether and just signing him to a deal. And then you got the rumors, or not rumors, but the confirmed news that CeeDee Lamb has actually restructured his entire contract to now where between the Ezigbo deal, or Oda Ezigbo deal, and then the Lamb contract, they basically freed up, I want to say it was upwards of almost $20 million in cap space. or something like
my
that.
internet going out?
We can still hear you. No, it looks like you're good now.
Oh no.
No, you're good now. I can see it. You're still good.
Okay.
But they're able to free up. I want to say it was upwards of maybe 20 million in cap space. So kind of makes you wonder that the next domino to fall is Micah Parsons.
Yeah, very possible. I mean, we obviously had those natural connections of Micah Parsons to the Commanders. I don't think that's going to happen now. I think they're going to find a way to keep Micah Parsons in the building. He is the backbone of what they do defensively, and they're obviously kind of reformulating their entire defensive scheme this year. I can't recall off the top of my head who Brian Schottenheimer brought in as the defensive coordinator, but they're pivoting away from Mike Zimmer and his very archaic scheme that a lot of players struggled in last year. And it's a good thing for them, man. So if they can get Micah Parsons back in the building, then dare I say it, the Dallas Cowboys might actually be in pretty decent shape heading into this season.
Yeah. And it's one where I think there was that point in time where, I mean, you and I were kind of like speculating of like, are they really going to be moving away from, Micah Parsons, right? Like, are they actually going to be moving away? And sure enough, the common sense seems to be prevailing a little bit in Jerry's world that they need to keep Micah Parsons, and keep him for long term. So, moving forward to the NFC North, which was rather the most competitive, if you will, division of all of sports. And it's one where I just can't remember the last time where you had two possible division leaders finish with upwards of 14 wins. It's so wild, with the way that division unfolded. Also, before to the transition to this a little bit, I also find it funny, Gage, that the Minnesota Vikings clowned, and the fan base clowned Sean Payton, for driving up the JJ McCarthy rumors, right? And then with that, they lucked out for sure. They lucked out, and Sam Darnold ends up balling out for them, arguably an MVP candidate for him. And now it certainly seems like they're not going to be franchise tagging him. Right, that was announced today. They're not going to be franchise tagging him, which lends you to believe that they should be pushing for a long-term or a contract extension of some sort. I just think it's so funny. They were pushing so much about how the Denver Broncos, or I should say Sean Payton, was driving all of it up, and that he was never interested in JJ McCarthy. All for him, JJ, to possibly not even be the guy going forward for the Minnesota Vikings, or I should say find himself in a Jordan Love type situation with the Minnesota Vikings.
Yep. The NFL, man, it works in very mysterious ways, and we have these unforeseen breakouts pretty much every single year. And Sam Darnold, I always thought he had that chance to do that after spending that year in a structured offensive system under Kyle Shanahan. And people want to forget that his second time that he got a chance to play in Carolina, when Steve Wilkes had taken over as the interim head coach, he actually was playing some pretty good ball. He absolutely beat the Broncos' ass in his first start back after Baker Mayfield had gotten that chance. So Sam Darnold always had it in him, and I'm very happy for Sam that he's maybe found a home in Minnesota. But yeah, and you look at it from the JJ McCarthy perspective, there are some Vikings fans out there that are like, why are we investing in Sam Darnold when we have JJ McCarthy? And it's like, Sam Darnold's gone out there and proven he can be successful in this scheme. We don't know what JJ McCarthy is. It's almost like the TV show Let's Make a Deal. You could have the $500, or you could take what's behind curtain number 2. It could be a car, or it could be what they call a zonk, which is a junk bullshit prize. So really, you are playing almost like a lottery ticket with JJ McCarthy. We've seen Sam Darnold be successful, and I don't think it's just a one-off thing with Darnold. Yes, he crapped the bed in a big situation in the Detroit game
really.
and in the LA. Yeah, in 2 games. Yeah, 2 big situations. But at the end of the day, man, we've seen him play composed, clean football for the majority of the year. His mechanics are so much better than they were coming into the NFL. He is so flawless in terms of his mechanics and his fundamentals. I just think that Sam Darnold is the perfect fit. And yeah, man, JJ McCarthy, it may be a Jordan Love situation where you sit him for a couple of years behind Darnold. You give Darnold basically a 2-year deal that's dressed up as a 4-year deal, but you have that out after year 2, and then you can put McCarthy in. Or you just move on from McCarthy and maybe you trade him to a team that's desperate for a quarterback like the Giants or maybe even the Raiders, the Rams, you could trade him to one of these places and have him develop or maybe give him a shot to start right away if you are confident enough moving forward that Darnold is very much your franchise quarterback. It's a decision that I'm glad I'm not getting paid to make out there in Minnesota.
For sure. Kona, if I had a Kona Big Wave with me, I probably would, do the same thing. Unfortunately, staying in my parents' place, we just ran out of Kona Big Wave. We actually had one remaining. So I probably would do a cheers for you, but unfortunately we are out of Kona Big Wave. But
I'll cheers you with a Mountain Dew.
I was gonna say, just don't do like the one video that I sent you guys. But to your point, like the JJ McCarthy angle is going to be a bit interesting because, first off, let's just set the record straight. To what Jack mentioned in the comment, Darnold is a fool if he doesn't sign if you look at the destinations of where he would probably go, and this is actually where I was going to go with it too, is you look at all the destinations. I mean, he might get a better deal elsewhere, but the whole idea is, and ironically enough, it's all about fit. And look at the Broncos and look at Sean Payton. Ironically, it's all about fit and quarterback. There's no better fit for Sam Darnold than the Minnesota Vikings right now under Kevin O'Connell. There's no better fit right now. And so, yeah, he might get a better contract elsewhere, which could drive him elsewhere, and more length of years elsewhere. But the best thing
Raiders,
right. For the best thing for his possible career is to stay with Minnesota. And so I think that, it's one where it's like the other domino, right? So obviously Matthew Stafford was the large domino. But now you have the Sam Darnold thing here. The more things, I'm convinced the more things prolong with Darnold where he's not signed means that every day passes, he is going to be agreeing to a deal with the Minnesota Vikings. Yep. And specifically too, if he's not even taking visits and I would even say for the Vikings, it's the only part where it's interesting is the deal itself with Darnold, right? And we touched on it briefly because and it is the JJ McCarthy angle. Are they going to be signing, are they going to be signing him to 3-year deal, right? Like a 3-year deal, 4-year deal. So I think that's where it's going to be a bit interesting because of that JJ angle. Because then at that point, maybe JJ, once he's healthy and once he starts actually, in air quotes, looking better than Darnold, then maybe you might actually have some very interested teams that start calling, like if the Rams, interestingly enough, are moved on from Matthew Stafford, and then at that point it's gonna be like, okay, let's kind of talk about this a little bit. What could we be able to give you? Because I've got to think that there will be QB needy teams that will look at JJ McCarthy in a much better situation than Jordan Love in terms of being asked about availability. And I'm not saying the team's asked about Love's availability, but I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of QB needy teams that will look at Minnesota's situation where it's like, what can we give you for JJ?
Yeah. But then if you're Minnesota, there's a few angles that you have to look at it from. Obviously, the angle that endorses you keeping J.J. McCarthy is, let's say that you extend Darnold 3-4 years. By the end of that deal, he's basically going to be the same age that Bo Nix is right now. So he could step in, take over, and play really good football for you, in theory, ideally.
Yeah.
Then there's the other angle of it where if you keep JJ and you extend Darnold, you're always going to have that fan base. If Darnold doesn't play well to start the season, they're all going to be screaming for JJ McCarthy. So do you want that distraction for Darnold as well as JJ? I don't know. There's a lot to think about here if you're Minnesota, and there's pros and cons to really both sides of the equation.
Yeah, 1,000%. Now we move to the other conference. We move to the AFC, and we move to one of the best divisions in all of football. To the AFC South we go, to the Colts. And, look, the Broncos had to deal with it when Anthony Richardson came to town. Look, the Richardson circus, if you will, is going to be an interesting one to follow, because what is the future of Anthony Richardson in in Indianapolis?
Hopefully he has no future whatsoever in Denver. God, no.
Yeah. But it's one where, like, what is his future? Like, is he going to be, a player that he's had all the tools and it's just not going to be, worthwhile as far as a starter? It makes you wonder. And I know that I've been very, very critical here on this show about Anthony Richardson, and you and I witnessed that just awful performance against the Broncos in person. And it's one where I do think that of all of the teams, specifically probably like in the AFC, there might not be a more puzzling team from a quarterback perspective of what they need to do than the Colts. Because, like, I can understand wanting to put their eggs in the basket and continue to develop Anthony Richardson, because, again, we should remind everybody he's still a young quarterback, right? Like, he is still rather a young quarterback. But, as time moves on and there's no single ounce of development, you got to cut your losses at some point. The more bad performances start stacking up. And why do I say all this? Because, Gage, there's a rumor out there that they might bring in another bad quarterback to that quarterback room. And that would be none other, than Trip on the Turf, in primetime football himself, Daniel Jones.
Yep. And I got to be honest, the more and more we talk about it, the more and more I think it's going to happen. And the Colts have backed themselves into a corner. It doesn't have to be this complicated. If you are second guessing whether Anthony Richardson is going to be your guy or not, then the answer is no.
Yep.
The answer is no. There are so many red flags with Anthony Richardson. When you strip away the highlight level plays, you see an inaccurate quarterback with horrible mechanics, horrible decision-making, horrible footwork, is known to have quit on his team on multiple occasions. You have teammates like DeForest Buckner going up to him and saying, bro, you're the reason why I chose to re-sign here, but you got to hold up your end of the deal. Red flag, red flag, red flag. The dude is not going to be an NFL caliber starting quarterback. He's just not. It's almost like Drew Lock. He reminds me of Drew Lock so much. And it's not that he doesn't have the physical talent, but he doesn't have the right stuff up here. He is not made of the right substance to be an NFL quarterback. And that's not something you can teach. That's not something you can fix without having to sit for multiple years like a guy like Geno Smith did. That's the only way that you can do that. Otherwise, I'm sorry, man. Anthony Richardson is a lost cause, and the Indianapolis Colts had a chance to cut their losses this offseason and admit that they fucked up, but they didn't do it. They doubled down, and now you're going to probably have to witness a year of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. It's Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater all over again, baby.
Maybe the worst type of scenario of Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, too.
Yeah, it's like that and even worse.
Yeah. Well, and again, and I pulled up some of the comments, and it's just like, it's just really unfortunate that the black mark on Anthony Richardson's record is, that he took himself out of a game, and you can't do that if you are a professional quarterback, and if you were injured or somewhat, like I would understand it to a certain degree, right? But the fact is, but he was tired and he took himself out of a game. Like, that is such a bad look for you. And because of that, that's when we did the show with 5280, where I went in on him. And I just said that kind of stuff, when you pull that kind of crap, it looks bad on you especially, but it looks even worse for the franchise. It looks worse for the team. It looks worse for Shane Steichen specifically, because, this is a head coach who knows quarterbacks quite well and done well with quarterbacks, or a quarterback specifically in Jalen Hurts. So it is such a bad look for you that, look, I mean, there is no way, shape, or form where I never thought I would say Jamarcus Russell and Anthony Richardson in the same sentence. But the more time passes and the more cognitively as it passes for Anthony Richardson, the more true it's becoming. He is a very, very talented quarterback. Don't get me wrong. Very talented. But unfortunately, the decisions that you make can be a ramification for the rest of your NFL career. And right now, that sole decision that he made of taking himself out of a game and putting himself on the bench. Don't make me cue up the Little Giants scene where, they talk about putting yourself on the bench. He literally put himself on the bench, and he has paid the price for it.
Yep. And he still cannot stay healthy. He got injured again at the end of the year, and we didn't see him for the last couple of games. That's another red flag. I don't understand why the Colts want to double down on this investment, aside from, we spent the 4th overall pick on him and he's really talented. You know who else was really talented? Paxton Lynch. And when it became apparent that he wasn't the guy, you know what the Denver Broncos did? They cut him. The Indianapolis Colts are at some point going to do the same thing, but they're going to realize it a lot later than the Denver Broncos did. You got to give the Denver Broncos credit. They realize pretty quickly when they screw up, and they right their wrongs. They did it with Paxton Lynch, and they did it with Russell Wilson. You may have to eat some money to do it, but that's the price you have to pay when you are willing to admit that you screwed up.
Yep. And keeping the same theme of the Giants and Daniel Jones, well, they're also a QB needy team because Joe Shine has, royally messed up by not keeping Saquon Barkley and actually committing to Daniel Jones. So now they are needing a quarterback again. And sorry for the Raiders fans in the chat for being used twice in 2 months. But the Giants are also a QB needy team, and they were aggressively pursuing Matt Stafford. And it wasn't obviously just them. The Raiders and Giants were very, very close to getting Matt Stafford. That's everything that we have been hearing. So it wasn't just either the Raiders it wasn't just the Raiders, but also the Giants were really, really close to possibly getting Stafford based on how aggressive they were approaching it. So they didn't get Stafford, but I will say, I think from the Giants side of things, I think this is a glimpse in the crystal ball of the draft. And we don't need to talk too much about the scouting combine, but we can talk draft necessarily. I think we have an idea, Gage, that the Giants finally will be aggressive for a quarterback, it seems, in one of the worst quarterback classes we've ever seen since Kenny Pickett, Will Levis, and Malik Willis. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. It's not that bad. It's just top heavy. Shedeur Sanders is getting way too much shit from the NFL. Way too much. It's kind of ridiculous, honestly. I'm going to go on a little side tangent here about Shedeur Sanders, because this dude I feel like is being portrayed in a wrong way. People want him to be something he's not. Shedeur Sanders is an accurate quarterback who makes good decisions operating from the pocket. He did not inherit his dad's athleticism. He did not inherit that. But he is still pretty much your prototypical pocket passing quarterback. And that can still work in the modern NFL, contrary to what the media wants you to think. People want Shedeur to be this flashy quarterback who makes these big explosive plays out of structure. And spoiler alert, he can still make those plays. But the fact that we are just sitting here saying that Shedeur shouldn't be a top pick is just completely and utterly ridiculous. I do think that NFL teams, because let's just be honest, they're stupid sometimes, are going to have Shedeur fall down the board. But that's just a bad move in my opinion, and there are going to be a lot of teams who regret that decision. And I'm not even a Colorado fan. I live in the area, but I am not a Colorado Buffs fan. I don't have a college football team. I don't follow college football like that. I am just speaking on what I've seen on tape watching him play these past couple of years. And I'm sorry, some of these narratives out there expose a lot of non-ball knowers, including non-ball knowers who have high positions in the NFL.
Or ball knowers who are ball knowers just happen to have a really, really bad take.
That too.
And I mean, admittedly, I do think that Shedeur has a lot of talent. There's no doubt. But I mean, I think if you were talking about a normal class, like a normal class in the sense of, like if you were to put him, into the class of last year, right? I think they would be within that Spencer Rattler tier. Like if I'm being completely honest, I think they would be a bit in that Spencer Rattler tier, for maybe a few ticks above that, So I just think though that like once you get that drop off with Shedeur, like it is really bad though. But I will say like I would not be surprised though, because we kind of did the same thing, unfortunately, with that 2021 class, right? Which was Kenny Pickett, Will Levis, Malik Willis. And interestingly enough, that was the class that, Brock Purdy was drafted. But like, we did it with that class where we would kind of talk ourselves into this draft class, but then when push came to shove, one quarterback was taken in the first round. And then the latter one was taken in like the third round or fourth round, which ended up being Will Levis. So nothing surprises me anymore in the NFL to where, there could be players that, that just turn off other teams. And then because of that, it pushes them down boards and, they just go a lot later than normal or later than, than what it usually should have been. Right. So like, I'm just saying like, I expect, Shedeur to possibly be taken by the Giants, since that's like the current trend right now is that he's going to be taken by the Giants. But would I be surprised if he's falling down boards and he's not taken until like pick 28, just like, let's just say, and a team like the Raiders jumps into the first round and takes him. Like I wouldn't be the least bit surprised by that. Like it just, again, there's just nothing that surprises me. And I definitely do think that personality wise, I can understand probably why it might turn some teams off, but like this idea that it will turn every single team off, I think is a bit of a misconception, because it's not going to turn every single team off. Like we're talking about 32 teams here. Every team views things differently. Some view them the same way. Some teams view it a bit differently than others. And so because of that, I think you might see some teams that are desperate enough, like that New York Giants team, or maybe even the Las Vegas Raiders, where they'll be like, you know what? We need a quarterback, but we also have an insurance policy on our roster, like Aaron Rodgers. Like I think that, like I just think that when you look at it, like it would make sense structurally that if they be like, okay, we're going to go get Aaron Rodgers, he's going to go to the Giants, and then we'll be like, okay, then we can get Shedeur and have some long-term planning in place, which would also be funny because, one more time again, you have Aaron Rodgers with the future starting quarterback on your roster. One more time again with Aaron Rodgers.
Yep. So that's definitely interesting. Those are all interesting angles, but we hear these reports coming out about the Giants being so desperate that they might be willing to trade up with the Tennessee Titans to number 1. That's something that I think we really do need to discuss as well, because then the Giants would have their pick of the litter. Who would you take in that scenario, Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? Obviously, it would be Cam Ward, because he has become that big riser over the course of this entire draft process, where he's now pretty much the clear-cut number 1 quarterback. So if that happens, then you've got the Cleveland Browns at number 2. How desperate are they for a quarterback? Do they want to take that gamble on Shedeur Sanders at number 2 overall? Because you've got them being all like, hey, we've got Deshaun Watson on the roster who's not going to play for us again. We might go out and sign a veteran quarterback like a Kirk Cousins, but is that really going to move the needle for you? Then they trade away Myles Garrett most likely if they are not stubborn and don't do it. But I'm going to assume that they do. You're going to have that need for a pass rusher. So do you want to go with like an Abdul Carter, despite the injury concerns, or maybe a Michael Walker, somebody like that? There's just a lot of conversation to be had here on how desperate are the Cleveland Browns in terms of maybe going after Shedeur at number 2 overall. We might be having this conversation where the Giants come up to get Cam Ward, and then Shedeur's gone at number 2 to the Browns, and that's just that.
Yeah, and I think that's the other angle of this is you do have Cleveland, which, I mean, the strong rumors right now is that the Tennessee Titans are going to be taking Abdul Carter at number 1. And of course, there's the rumors that the Giants may be trading from 3 to 1. And then at that point, that's going to be the decision of, at that point it's for a quarterback. The question is just, is it Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? And I think that from what I've been seeing just lately, it seems like it would tend to be Shedeur at that point. But I mean, just kind of pick your hat at that point. And I think that, for Cleveland, they should take a quarterback. You and I've talked about this before, like they should take a quarterback, right? And that they should be cutting their losses with Deshaun Watson. Like there's no doubt they should be. It's just a matter of like, when you look at from just a standpoint, like maybe that's in essence what it is that like the Titans probably are locked into whatever they're going to be doing, which is probably Abdul Carter. The Browns are probably the team we do need to be looking at, which is, hey, they might actually need to be going quarterback here. So if they do quarterback, that other quarterback's probably going to be going to the New York Giants if they stand pat, which based on kind of a rough-ish quarterback class, I probably would want to stay pat too, if I'm being completely honest, and not do a 3 to 1.
Well, let's just say for a second here that the Giants are confident, that the Titans are confident that both the Giants and the Browns would take quarterbacks. Then you could move back to 3, still get Abdul Carter as well as a draft haul. That could be a gamble you'd be willing to take if you're confident that the Browns are going to take a quarterback.
Yeah.
Because obviously if the Giants came up, they'd be taking a quarterback.
We don't necessarily need to touch about the Browns and the trade stuff with Myles Garrett because we briefly just hit on that. But as we're kind of tricking down to some of the Broncos related stuff, might as well, touch on, some of the players that were tagged in the sense, or one player that was tagged and a player that was moved. And T. Higgins was franchise tagged twice in 2 years. The expectation is that there will be a deal done. Like that's the expectation. There will be a deal done, or it's a tag and trade situation. Is that it's going to be in it? But I think the expectation from a lot of us, myself included, is the deal is going to end up being done between T. Higgins, and a deal is going to be done between the Bengals and Jamar Chase, because it seems pretty evident when you hear them talk about Chase, like they're going to be making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. Like that's going to be happening. And then, of course, Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel was, in fact, traded to the Commanders. I mean, you and I have been on record about not being interested in Deebo. I was just more looking at it from the standpoint of, like, he fits the Joker mold of what Sean would be looking for, so it would make total sense for them to be interested. And interestingly enough, Deebo Samuel himself actually was more interested in the Denver Broncos than the Washington Commanders, which is the biggest story of all of this, is that Deebo Samuel, of all people, was interested in the Broncos. So given the current state of the Broncos, that's probably, if you're going to go Broncos angle, that's probably where we should go. But those two players, Gage, Higgins gets tagged, and Deebo Samuel gets traded to the Washington Commanders for a 5th round pick.
Yeah. So I'll start off with T. Higgins here because I have a pretty strong opinion on this. If you are confident enough in T. Higgins to be that long-term number 2 receiver for you, then you should have already gotten this deal done. It's the 2nd year in a row that a deal might get done this offseason, but we could also be sitting here come August and a deal has not gotten done and T. Higgins is holding out of training camp. The Cincinnati Bengals are a notoriously cheap organization, and I do believe they will honor their word with Jamar Chase. I believe they will make him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, but I am not as confident that they will honor their word with T. Higgins. And Higgins doesn't seem to be very confident in it either, just based on his language on Twitter and based on the way that he's talked. I don't think that T. Higgins is confident in the Bengals organization. And based on their moves that they've made these past few years, I can't say that I'm very confident in them either, with the way that they've completely neglected needs on the defensive side of the ball. And this is why I don't think they should pay T. Higgins, is because they have a lot of needs on the other side of the ball. And we've seen these teams that have all kinds of offensive firepower but not have depth on defense collapse in the playoffs. The Detroit Lions are the most recent example of this. And I'm sorry, it's just borderline roster malpractice by the Cincinnati Bengals. As far as Deebo Samuel is concerned, again, like you said, I've been on the record saying that the Denver Broncos are not a team that should be interested in Deebo Samuel, and ultimately they were not interested. Deebo wanting to come here, like you said, is more the angle we should focus on, because that means that players want to come and play for the Denver Broncos.
Like players.
Guys want to come here. Dudes in the NFL, they want to come here because they believe in what Sean Payton and Bo Nix are building. And that is awesome. That is so awesome, because that's not something that we could have said about the Denver Broncos for the last several seasons. The last time that we could have said that about the Denver Broncos was that 2014 free agency where John Elway goes ham and brings in the TJ Wards and the Emmanuel Sanders, the Aqib Talibs, all these dogs. That's really the last time that we could have said that people wanted to come and play for the Denver Broncos. So I'm so pumped, man, because this team is heading in the right direction, and the proof is in the pudding in terms of that.
Yeah. One of the wide receivers that actually we didn't get a chance to mention, of course, is one that the Raiders fans all know too well. Davante Adams was released from the New York Football Jets. And Jack, I might actually agree with you in the sense that I think if you look at it just on the surface of wide receiver, I might actually agree. I think the one thing that Deebo just offers you a little bit more than Cortland is that versatility, and he's more of a joker than Cortland. So like that's the one thing that I would, and say, and it's one of the reasons why I thought that, like, from a fit side of things, he did kind of fit with what Sean Payton would have wanted. But Davante Adams, Davante Adams was released, and I do know that there are some Bronco fans that are interested, in Adams, and I will just say this, Gage. I don't think you want to come here. One, he already played for the division rival of the Las Vegas Raiders. And two, Sean Payton himself, the head coach himself, blasted Aaron Rodgers, the New York Jets, and Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers' best friend. I'm not sure Adams would be wanting to go to an organization that basically did all that. And then also, not to mention too, he's been kind of a locker room problem. He's a locker room problem. And it's a lot of the reasons why I think player-wise, if you look at Stephon Diggs and you look at Devontae Adams, they fit perfectly, actually. Like, Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs fit perfectly for what they want to do. But the fit of the locker room, which is something that Sean Payton has talked about, like, the locker room is a big part of this organization. He doesn't. Neither of those dudes actually fit it. So, yeah, I just think that, it's one where I don't see that as a fit. And I think if you are looking at some potential fits, which it came out, Gage, that he's looking at the West Coast, I think you would probably be really, in terms of a good fit, the Los Angeles Rams. They moved on. They're clearly going to be moving on from Cooper Kupp. You basically fit in a guy who is a Kupp type of player and just moves right into what he was able to do with McVay and Puka Nacua.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that would be an absolutely fantastic fit. There's also been the reports out there that Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are basically a package deal. Wherever Aaron goes, Devontae goes. But if Aaron ends up retiring, then Devontae's pretty much going to be free. Does he want to go to New Orleans and maybe reunite with Derek Carr? Because the reports coming out of New Orleans have indicated that they're going to keep Derek Carr. Devontae's pretty much made it clear that he only wants to play with two quarterbacks, and those are his best friends, Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr. Is that a sound strategy in terms of trying to sustain your career? I wouldn't say so, especially when it comes to Derek Carr. But yeah, man, Devontae Adams, the angle that I'm really glad that you brought up is the fact that he's been an outspoken, at times, locker room cancer, and Sean Payton has made active moves to eliminate that from the Broncos locker room, i.e. trading away Jerry Jeudy. That's the main reason why I didn't think Deebo Samuel made any sense here, and it's the main reason why I don't think Devontae Adams makes any sense here. Sean Payton has tried to remove that type of attitude and that type of locker room dysfunction, and just adding another type of player like that is counterintuitive.
It is. Yeah, it is definitely counterintuitive. And then so much so, it brings us now to the Broncos discussion. And we did see some Broncos stuff in the comments, so we'll be able to get to here. So we did see some Broncos stuff, like I said, so we'll be able to get to that here in just a little bit. Let's touch on the fact that, one of the things that was reported that the Broncos will have 41 in estimated cap space. Actually, that's more than they had in the year where they signed Mike McGlinchey, Ben Powers, and who was the other one? Zach Allen. Who, as we found out, was the better choice between, Draymond Jones and Zach Allen. Now that, the Seahawks decided to cut 3 players today, and one of them being Draymond Jones, Broncos legend Draymond Jones.
And I want to remind us of the absolute gem that Let's Talk Broncos Muse unearthed on Twitter, where Draymond Jones retweeted something from Mile High Mims, and the caption was, "Poverty organizations thinking that they actually have a chance to win something in the preseason is awfully cute." It was something to that effect. And here we have Draymond Jones, after talking all of that shit, not even lasting his entirety of his deal in Seattle. They cut him after, in essence, benching him last year. And we've got Zach Allen, an all-pro player who is absolutely killing it, leading the team in pressures from the interior. I don't know if it's pressures overall. I think Benito got that one, but being up there towards the top of the team in pressures, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league, an absolute dominant force, and Draymond Jones looking for a job.
The Seattle Seahawks will have moved on from Shelby Harris and Draymond Jones, both of which were former Denver Broncos, in less than 3 years. Like, just saying. Like,
there's only one player left in terms of the people that they got from that Russell Wilson trade,
and he's actually the better of the bunch.
Yeah.
And of all things, it's Noah Fant, the guy that was all criticized, to every single game by Bronco fans, and that was Noah Fant.
Yeah.
Man, it's going to be interesting to see, everything that unfolds. But with the $41 million in cap space, some rumors are now starting to kind of circulate. I'm disappointed that one of the players is not up there, and we just mentioned his name. But George Payton wants to extend Cortland Sutton, and he also wants to extend Nick Bonito. Let's start first with, Cortland Sutton, which I believe that there something I believe that was mentioned about Cortland Sutton here in the chat. I'll see if I can find it, but let me just ask you this, so we were talking about T. Higgins earlier, and I wanted to ask you this question, but I want to kind of save it for when we mentioned about Cortland Sutton, because it's it's a weird conversation, because there are some players out there where it's I don't think Cortland Sutton fits if you trade for Brandon Ayuk. I'm just going to say that. I don't think Cortland Sutton fits if you're going to be trading for T. Higgins. So, the T. Higgins stuff, would you trade in a tag and trade Cortland Sutton in a 3rd round pick for T. Higgins?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Cortland Sutton is a proven commodity in this offense. He has proven that he can operate at an efficient elite level, and he has established chemistry with Bo Nix. T. Higgins has never been a number 1 receiver in the entirety of his career. For all we know, he could be a really good Robin, but not a great Batman. I don't want to give up draft assets, plus having to sign him to a top-of-the-line extension. It just isn't worth it to me. It's not. Cortland Sutton has proven what he can do in this offense, and I think that the best is yet to come for Cortland Sutton. Another year with even more chemistry between him and Bo Nix. I think that this offense could go to the next level. We talked a little bit earlier about the comparisons between, a Cortland Sutton and a Deebo Samuel. It's really an apples to oranges comparison. Yes, they're both fruit, but they are nowhere near the same type of fruit. And I think that the Broncos already have, your Cortland Sutton and your Devon Vele, those bigger bodied wide receivers that can play your X role. But they need somebody who can play a Z, somebody that you can bring in motion, somebody that lines up off the ball and doesn't have to go up against a ton of press coverage. That's why I've been pounding the table for Cooper Kupp, because you can interchange guys like Kupp and Mims. You can put Mims as the Z and put Kupp in the slot, or vice versa. You can put Mims in the backfield, Kupp in the slot, and then Vele as the Z. Sean Payton's one of the best guys in terms of mixing up their personnel. And I think that Cooper Kupp would give you a dynamic option in terms of the ways that you'd be able to mix up personnel. And I've talked about this before. He's the best blocking wide receiver in the NFL, and he would immediately add juice to your lackluster run game. So that's why I'm pounding the table for somebody like that, who can really be almost like a joker for you, or a Swiss Army knife, the different type of ways that you could utilize them. And I don't think that there's really a player out there that would fill all of those needs quite like a Cooper Kupp.
And I agree. For full disclosure, I do think that they do come to a deal. And one of the strong proponents of this is Cortland Sutton is Bo Nix's favorite target right now. Yeah. He is his number 1 target, and those things can certainly change. One thing I will say is, I don't know what is going to be coming of the deal. If it pushes a little bit upwards of 20, I would be a bit skeptical of it. Just because, and it's a lot of the conversation we did have last year, which was, I don't think Sutton is a 20 million and above wide receiver, but the market value probably suggests that. And so we have to kind of come to grips, with that. And I do think that the Cooper Kupp thing, just from a brief side angle, is one I want to follow. And I realize that there's some pushback by some people on Twitter who are some media members that's saying Broncos might not be interested in Kupp. Well, they may not be interested in Kupp to trade for him. There's a difference. They may not be interested enough to trade for him. It's one of the reasons why when we were having the conversation about Deebo Samuel, I actually am convinced that if Deebo Samuel was on the market for free, you're probably talking about a lot more smoke and fire in regards to Deebo Samuel in Denver on the open market. So I think if Cooper Kupp is released, I very much believe that the Broncos are going to be one of the top suitors for him And then again, not to play the tinfoil hat type of guy, Sean McVay and Sean Payton did have a meeting right around that point in time. Cooper Kupp asked for a trade. Like, I hate to put the tinfoil hat game, but like, it was right around that point in time when Cooper Kupp asked for a trade. Just letting that all be known. But like, in terms of Sutton, like, the other part I would have to say too is they don't necessarily have to agree to an extension this year. That's why it's just interesting. Like, they don't have to agree to one this year. I mean, they certainly have to in 2026, but and it's a good reminder in the sense of, like, and this was mentioned in the chat. I believe Alex mentioned this. Like, Payton tells everyone what he was going to do, and I think it's a reminder, Gage, that watch what the Broncos do. Don't watch what the Broncos say. And I mean, I will say, like, in terms of the Joker, that's pretty evident. Like, the Broncos are going to be looking for a Joker, but like, watch what they do in a sense. And in terms of Courtland Sutton, like I said, I think they extend him, but in this particular draft, there are some players at wide receiver who they could bring in that if they don't agree to a deal with Courtland, it's just something to monitor. Guys like Jaden Higgins, Alec Ayamaner, Trey Harris, just a few of those wide receivers being named. If they bring those types of wide receivers in, maybe even a Teteroa McMillan, if he just randomly falls, like if McMillan falls, like, and even a Burden for that matter. I mean, I know he's not 6'3" and above, or 6'2" and above, like Sutton, but like, watch what happens if they add a rather high profile wide receiver in this draft class. That would kind of tend to suggest, Gage, that they might be content with moving on from Sutton after this year.
For sure. And a couple of those names that you mentioned definitely intrigue me. Obviously, Ted McMillan's the number one receiver in the class. Like, he is an absolutely all-around blue chip player. So if he falls, he's the best player available. And my philosophy in the draft is you take the best player available every single time. So that would be a no-brainer. But let's say that they do go after somebody a little bit later on, like a Jaden Higgins, for example. I'm kind of shocked you didn't mention your boy Isaiah Nate there. But, if they were to go after somebody like that, then that would definitely suggest that they're willing to move on from Sutton. If they don't get a deal done with Sutton this season, I do believe that they will give him some incentives. That way he can play through this year with a little bit of a nest egg in there. That way he's not playing on a fully unguaranteed contract. I think they will take care of him in that sense. But the way that the wind is blowing right now does seem to indicate that he will be extended. And that was what I was hearing down at the Shrine Bowl too. The big ticket wide receiver move that the Denver Broncos are going to make is extending Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the big ticket one in terms, and when we say that, it means like the $20 million range of a wide receiver. That's what we're talking. I still think that they add a veteran wide receiver. Just full disclosure there. The question is just going to be who, and thus I would hope that veteran wide receiver is someone who can replace Little Jordan Humphrey and replace Josh Reynolds, the kind of production that they actually had there. And yeah, David, I mean, Sutton was Bo's blanket on third down. I think that's why I'm excited from a Sutton point of view, because, when you look at it from the course of the season, we even talked about it, Gage, like, he was a valuable weapon when it came to Bo Nix and specifically his development. So, like, number one, I don't want to mess with Bo Nix's development. And I think also, too, the best thing for Courtland Sutton's career was Bo Nix. I mean, you finally get a chance to actually have a quarterback for the first time in your career since the Joe Flacco era, where you had a 1,000-yard, receiver season with three quarterbacks at your, disposal: Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, and the Drew Semper to remember, right? Like, so you were finally able to get your 1,000-yard season. So you're finally able to become possibly the wide receiver that we all envisioned when you drafted him, or when Dallas was hoping to draft him, and they didn't. So moving on to another player who's a South Florida kid, and actually really kind of transformed himself to be a defensive player of the year alongside of, Pat Surtain. And this is a very interesting case here, Gage, because it's one where I understand maybe say next year and he has the exact same season that he's been having. Then at that point, it makes a ton of sense. But also after his first boom of a season, and you want to have some contract extension talks with him now, and it's upwards of $23 million per year, which has been the rumor from DNVR. That does seem a bit rich here. So I will just ask you this: would it be wise? Because Benito is one where they don't necessarily need to extend him specifically this year. Would you rather actually have a case where you have him prove it one more year and then you extend him, or would you kind of just start first with like a $20 million per year deal for Nick Benito?
I kind of think I'd more go towards that avenue and just see if his representation would be willing to take it. I would think that his representation would probably scoff at that. So I don't know, man. I think that it all is dependent on, does Benito want to bet on himself and see if he can maybe prove for another year that he can be that elite type of player? Because I do think there are areas where Benito still needs to grow, in particular run defense. He's not going to be the biggest, strongest player out there. He's just not. But I do think that there is sort of that level of caution from the Denver Broncos where we've seen some of these edge rushers have a big year, get the extension, and that big year ends up being an anomaly. Do I think that's the case for Benito? No, because I think we've seen consistent growth from him throughout his entire career, and I expect that to continue. There's another angle of this as well that I really don't like having to bring up, but it is something to consider, and that is Michael Wilhoit, the Broncos edge rushers coach, ended up getting arrested out there at DIA for an incident that I'm not going to really go into here. You can look it up if you want to, if you have yet to hear about it.
He also won't be here. Full disclosure.
That's what I was going to get to, was that he's most likely not going to be in that position come next season. So he might have a new edge rushers coach in there. And it's under Wilhoit that we've really seen that massive development from Nick Benito. Will that continue with a new coach who may not have as good of a relationship with him as Wilhoit did? I don't know. So if you're the Broncos, maybe you do give it another year and let Benito go out there and prove it.
I'm not worried about that one bit. And the reason why I say that is because actually Jamar Cain is the defensive line coach for the Denver Broncos. And Jamar Cain actually is the one who has the most tied relationship of anyone to Nick Benito. So I'm not actually worried about the whole Wilhoit thing, because Jamar Cain, for anybody that doesn't know, Cain was Benito's pass rush specialist coach at Oklahoma. So I am more than confident that it's that's actually that's actually not going to be too much of a worry. I think the worry there would be if you lost Jamar Cain. That would be the biggest worry, as him being the defensive line coach. But of course, him being so close to Nick Benito, that's when I would be like, we might actually see a bit of a drop off there. So I'm more convinced that the Wilhoit thing is, it's a pass rush thing for sure, but I think that just having Cain simply on the roster, I think is just the biggest thing, of course, for Benito's development.
Well, there you go.
But I will say I'm a bit surprised that they aren't having a conversation with a player who probably should have been in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation for the Denver Broncos, and that is Zach Allen. I'm a bit surprised we have yet to hear any of that.
I think that might come a little bit more next offseason. I think that you might hear some of those talks because he has, what is it, 1 or 2 more years left?
I think that sounds right.
Yeah, so you have time with Zach Allen. You need to prioritize a little bit higher Cortland Sutton, who only has the 1 year left, and it's not guaranteed, and you need to prioritize Nick Benito. But that's not saying they won't get a deal done with Zach Allen. I'm very confident that they will. It's just, I think that in terms of timeline, it's maybe going to be in the middle of the season, kind of like what we saw with Garrett Bowles, where, what was it, November, December, that's when we saw him get his bag.
Yeah.
So that might be what we see with Zach Allen.
And
you're going to have to think about, Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers. Actually, I believe both of them are going to be free agents at the end of next year. So those are two conversations that you're going to have.
and actually, this is exactly how I think that the Broncos are going to be operating. I think they get Sutton done now. And Benito, I think, is actually going to be a wait and see. But I think it's actually going to be one where it does unfold just like Jonathan Cooper, and in season. I actually think it's going to be one where it actually happens in season, because you mentioned November, and that's why it kind of started that. So I think that as the season is progressing, if he ends up having another phenomenal year, then you are going to be probably talking about a situation where they do extend this guy, like they do extend Nick Benito. And I think that, for whatever, you guys are thinking too, I actually don't think Jonathan Franklin Myers is going to be, in air quotes, that much. And I think that he's going to end up being another one where I could see the Walton Penner group and everything, where that's another one where I could see also done, in season. I think it's one where, the more it progresses and the way he can perform, he's another one that I could very much see them getting done as the season is progressing. But he's also one too where I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if, he ends up getting extended before the season as well, because stranger things have certainly happened, of course. Sometimes it even happens during training camp. Like, he performs in training camp, they see the mentality, they see the way the guys are forming, and then they're like, you know what? Get them. Get them locked up now. So I just think it's going to be very curious to see how it all unfolds, because you go up and down the line, and I will say, admittedly, if it was me kind of operating with the team, Courtland Sutton is probably priority number 3 for me in terms of extensions. And so that's kind of something that I've just kind of told myself is he is priority number 3. In a sense, because I probably have Benito and Zach Allen higher than him. I don't know about you, Gage, but it's one where I'm just a bit different with how the Broncos operated. But I get it. I get it in terms of them wanting to maybe extend Sutton here before the season starts.
Yeah. And I just think that they're kind of prioritizing it in terms of the timeline of when these deals have to get done. It's not so much the priority of how much they want to extend the player. It's more so, okay, we need to get Sutton done. If we're going to do it, we need to do it now. Then with Benito, if we're going to do it, we need to do it in the middle of the season or right at the end of the season. And then with Zach Allen, okay, we have a little bit more time to go ahead and get it done. But that's not to say that he's not a top priority for us. They have this basically window of a couple more years where they can afford to spend pretty freely. Then it's going to come time to pay Bo Nix, and we're going to maybe see a little bit of a diminishment of some of these resources. So this is the time where you can't get cheap. Give the guys the extension. Yeah. You are in a Super Bowl window. People are not realizing this enough. This is a Super Bowl window. We are trying to win right now. We're not focusing on 3 or 4 years from now. We're trying to win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years, right now.
So now finally getting to some of these comments. David mentioned first off, and we saw the comment here, Gage, but I think you and I have an idea of where we would go in terms of the QB room. But in terms of the backup quarterback room, do you feel like the backup should be Zach Wilson, or I'm assuming since you want to go to a different direction, of course. But I think if it was us, Gage, we probably would want to go with Zach Wilson personally. And this is something that I think that you and I even had a conversation of, you look at his options, right? You look at his options, and frankly, I really wasn't thinking too much of the wild card teams in the mix in terms of backup money and the way that Sam Darnold operated, interestingly enough. And I would think that Zach would maybe reach out to Darnold as far as like advice, and how he handled that. But I just think that the best thing for him is to stay with Denver. But I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see some teams like the LA Rams, like the San Francisco 49ers. Look, the 49ers are an interesting team because obviously they're going to be paying, it seems like they're going to be paying Brock Purdy, but Kyle Shanahan is so arrogant and so stubborn. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they don't pay Brock Purdy and they actually go with another cheaper-ish option of rolling out and going out and getting a Zach Wilson and making him succeed there, or just proposing this from the Niners' point of view, you keep Purdy on there and you bring Kirk Cousins in as a backup option to Brock Purdy. Like, it's just like, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see how the way the Niners operate things. So those are really the two interesting names in terms of teams that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if kind of swooped in and be like, hey, Zach, we love what you heard. We love what we heard, down there in Denver. We'd love to give you a bit of a pay raise and come down here and be our backup here for the Rams or even the 49ers.
I definitely could see the Rams. We talked about this on the last show. Mike LaFleur is the Rams offensive coordinator, and he was the offensive coordinator of the Jets when Zach Wilson was drafted. So there is that prior established relationship there. I could very easily see that. You've got Matthew Stafford, who the Rams have said is kind of operating on a year-to-year basis. They flirted with moving on from Stafford this offseason before eventually having a come-to-Jesus moment, and they did get a deal done. But I could see that. But like we've talked about before, outside of that, I just don't think there's going to be a very rich market for Zach Wilson. Where would he go that would give him a chance to start that isn't a crappy situation? Been in crappy situations before, and I think that him and his representation have enough wherewithal to steer clear from that. So I think that it's probably going to be between going to the Rams and developing under Stafford for a year or two, or coming back to Denver and just bringing the band back together and bring back Jarrett Stidham, bring back Zach Wilson, and let's run this thing back for another year. But obviously, it's probably not going to work out that way. We've seen a lot of media reports out there suggesting that Zach Wilson is going to have some sort of market. A lot of Broncos pundits do not believe he's going to be back. If it were up to me, I would prioritize retaining Zach over Jarrett, but most likely it's going to be Jarrett coming back and then bringing another developmental third-string quarterback in. I think there are some very intriguing options out there. There are some guys that you could bring in as sort of a reclamation project, maybe even a Trey Lance. Yeah. That'd be kind of fun. Give Sean Payton another toy that has the raw physical tools that needs football rehab.
Possibly Taysom Hill.
Yeah, well, I think Taysom Hill would come in, but he wouldn't factor into the quarterback math. He'd be
but an athlete. But in essence,
yeah, he'd be an athlete for you. He'd be a multi-way player, offense, special teams. So I wouldn't necessarily factor him into the quarterback math. They would bring in a third-string quarterback regardless of who that is. Another one I've heard, Tommy Cutlets.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, he would be a lot of fun. I don't know where you're coming off with this in terms of like the bad locker room in terms of Nick Bonito, and two, Zach Bond and Bonito are completely different players in terms of the linebacker position.
Yes.
So I and it was just simply contract related. It's not even correlating it to the locker room at all. So I don't know where you kind of came with the bad locker room vibe.
Yeah, they're completely different positions, first of all. I mean, Zach Bond's an off-ball linebacker. He's a coverage linebacker. Benito's an edge rusher. That's why I wish we'd get rid of this inside linebacker, outside linebacker jargon and just refer to them as either linebackers or edge rushers, because there's differences there.
Funny enough, though, to Zach Bond, I have him staying with the Eagles. But in just kind of talking about it with my dad and some of the other people that like in a Broncos chat that I'm with, I actually don't think there's no other team with the connections that can actually like meaning like when you look at the Broncos side of things, like they have the connections. Cody Rager, Sean Payton, even Jim Leonard when he was at Wisconsin, they have the connections. So if there was any team that he wanted to leave and go to, there honestly is no other team that he probably would want to go. And I hate to put words in his mouth, but there's like, one other team that he probably would want to go to, and it is the Denver Broncos. So
Yep.
I wouldn't even be the least bit surprised if you look at the splash, and this is probably a good transition to that. Gage is kind of previewing somewhat of the free agency stuff, but like, do you have a big splash in mind? Like if you look at positionally, where would you feel is the biggest splash, for this free agent market? Is it going to be at linebacker? Is it going to be safety? Is it going to be defensive line? Is it going to be running back? Where do you feel like this big splash is going to be?
I think it's going to be running back. I think that we've seen the Broncos have this history of flirting with running backs in free agency. They flirted with Josh Jacobs last offseason and probably would have got him if the Packers hadn't come in and offered him more money and at the time a more stable situation. Obviously, it played out to not exactly be that way, but yeah, I do think that running back, I think that you're going to look at an Aaron Jones, maybe even a Najee Harris. I think the Broncos realize that they're going to have to make a significant investment in that position. And I've talked about this. The Broncos have needs. Running back, tight end, linebacker, arguably safety. These are all needs that you have to fill in free agency. The draft is not for filling needs. The draft is there to acquire talent, to build depth on your roster. Free agency is there to plug holes and fill immediate needs. That's why I think they're going to sign a tight end in free agency. If you're believing what Benjamin Albright says, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion it's going to be Juwan Johnson. I think they're going to sign a running back in free agency of pretty high value. They'll bring other backs in as well through the draft and through undrafted free agency. But their big ticket move, I think, is going to come in free agency at the running back position. They'll probably bring in maybe a second-tier free agent at linebacker. Somebody who's good in coverage that I actually kind of like is Tyrell Dodson. He started the year in Seattle, wasn't really a good scheme fit there, so he moves on from them. He ends up going to the Dolphins midway through the year, and he had a fantastic finish to the year down there in Miami. So Dodson is definitely a guy that I would keep an eye on. But I think that's kind of the more second-tier areas, linebacker and maybe safety, but the big ticket move is going to be running back.
I think if you were to ask me, I actually think that the big ticket position that they're actually going to be getting is at linebacker or safety. That's actually kind of like where I'm actually having the vibe is. I think that's where it's going to be coming from, meaning it might actually be a Zach Bond. Is everything that we kind of outlined. I mean, I think that, if he ends up moving on, there is no team that kind of checks that box, connections and everything wise. And based on even a simple-ish transition, for him, and that would be the Denver Broncos and Zach Bond. So I think the question just there is, what would the contract be? Because he's certainly not going to end up getting a $20 million a year deal. But it's one where it's, you want to kind of monitor that, because it would be one where I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, because it's the Broncos and Eagles, where he kind of signs what probably would have been the same deal with the Eagles that he probably would have signed with Denver. And it's just simply just was about fit. And, Broncos are a up and coming team, right? Still a playoff team, in a Super Bowl window, as we were just talking about. So, it still kind of, for the most part, checks the box of what Bond would be looking for. And safety, you have players like a Cam Bynum, like a Justin Reed, players that would probably be considered a splash signing at that position, right? So I'm thinking, it's probably going to end up being, two positions, right? as far as where they possibly could make a big splash between one of them. And you know what? I think I will continue the theme from last year, and I guess I was just a year late with the Zach Bond thing, right? Because I guess I called Zach Bond last year. It just was a year late. I will say that the Broncos do sign Zach Bond, kind of changing it up a bit, and say that they actually signed Zach Bond this year. But as far as and I wasn't the person who asked this question. And I think it was our good friend Sarah Bettinger actually asked this question. Who do you feel like is the Brandon Jones type of signing for this team? Which is such a great way to phrase this, Gage, because like Brandon Jones was almost like forgotten with, at Miami, right? But a very talented player. But he was able to sign for almost like a kind of a bang for your buck type of deal that they were able to get really good value from, and turns out to be, arguably one of the top players at his position. So who do you feel like could be like the Brandon Jones type of signing for this team? And obviously that when I'm saying that, it's not like a defensive thing, offensive thing, but it's just like, who do you feel could be the Brandon Jones type signing?
Wow. I already mentioned him, but I do think he could fill that mold, and that's Tyrell Dodson. I don't think Dodson is going to command high-level starter money, but I do think he could step in and fill that role rather well. I think that he could have high-level, maybe even Pro Bowl type potential. So that's maybe the first player that comes to mind for me. I'm trying to think of somebody at running back, and I'm just drawing a blank.
It's funny. It might actually be Nick Chubb in that scenario.
That's a good one, actually. That is a good one.
Because it's one that's kind of forgotten about to a certain degree. And, he's injured, and, so yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's running back would kind of be, maybe the one direction I would probably want to go with. Maybe, Nick Chubb there. The other one is one that seems like, it's been linked to Denver basically from the moment of free agency, and that is Juwan Johnson. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to have Juwan Johnson maybe kind of fall into that category. But if I'm going to be completely honest, it might actually be a running back, because, and to the point, like, I wouldn't even be the least bit surprised to a degree. Looking at some of the comments, that might actually be a really good one. Would be Talanoa Hufanga. I actually like that one because, here's a player that he's kind of fallen somewhat, not to be a comparison to another former 49er, but that former 49er had a lot more injury history than this particular player, and we played a different position defensively, but it was like he almost has like somewhat of like Jason Verrett to him in Talanoa Hufanga. But like he's a solid player. It's just like you just need him healthy. And Hufanga is like one of those guys, like he's just got to be healthy and play for a full season. Because like what you see on tape is almost like a Polamalu clone. Like the ceiling that you see from him is like that high energy type of player that you pair with a Brandon Jones. Oh, that would just be one where, I think actually, the more I'm starting to kind of talk through it, it might not be the running back position. It actually might be the safety position again, because you have players like Trayvon Moehrig in this free agency class. You have Andre Sisco in this class for free agency. So you have some other safety options, right?
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, the safety position alone might actually end up being where you find another Brandon Jones type signing.
Yep. I got one that's a little bit of a hot take and maybe a surprise coming from me because I really love this player. But if you want to upgrade the nickel position and maybe get a little bit of an upgrade over Jaquan, how about Nate Hobbs? He's been one of the better nickels in the NFL in previous years. Last year kind of had a down year. Could get him on the cheap and steal him from a division rival.
Yeah, I wouldn't be the least specific. And to go somewhat into maybe draft, also free agency. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the Broncos address cornerback. Look, they may not address cornerback in say next week, but I would venture to guess that they probably will add a veteran corner of some sort. The Levi Wallaces of the world, not Levi Wallace, but I would venture to guess that they're going to be bringing in a veteran type corner that's going to just be like that vet of the room, and maybe that is going to be big play Slay. I don't know. But I do think that they will be adding a veteran corner to the room. And I also think that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they draft one, because that's a theme of George Payton, is them actually drafting a cornerback, of course, in this class. So other final...
There's some good press man corners in this class. Azariah Thomas immediately comes to mind.
Yep. Kobe Bryant. No.
Yeah, I love Kobe Bryant, dude.
No relation to the Kobe Bryant, of course, but
Shrine Bowl star.
Yeah. Travis Hunter, of course, if the Broncos were so greedy and they wanted to, trade up to inside the top 5 for Travis Hunter, playing both ways. So no, they definitely have some really good players there. Any other final thoughts as we are wrapping up the show?
I think we're good. I think we got it all.
Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, for the MHRT Network page. And as I was posting there on X and on Twitter, that we are really pushing for 2,000 subscribers on the MHRT Network. So please hit that subscribe button, click like, and share with your friends, and have your friends tell their friends about the MHRT Network, the 5280 podcast. Also, I want to give a huge congratulations to Jordan Lopez for joining the Mainly Broncos podcast. He will actually be starting tomorrow. It will be his very first show, so give him a huge warm welcome. So yeah, he will be on Wednesday, and I actually think we'll probably do a little bit more of a free agency deep dive and scouting combine deep dive, so getting the chance to kind of talk about some of the winners, losers, probably more so winners of the scouting combine, because there was a lot of winners of the scouting combine. So we're going to be talking about that. To everybody in the chat, man, was it popping tonight in the comments? So many people that were chiming in. We didn't get a chance to talk about all of them. Obviously, Jack Kenna from the Wild Wild West show, huge Raider fan, huge MHRT Network fan. Please follow what he does over there for the Wild Wild West. And just everybody else that was able to, Vegas Trojans football for hopping on. Great discussion, man, for being in the chat. Alex Smith, of course. David Young.
The Alex Smith?
Maybe the Alex Smith. You never know. D-Rock, of course, was in the chat. Bonnie, of course, he's a huge Mainly Broncos fan. It just comments up and down, man. We just had a lot of great, comments all throughout. So thank you guys so much. Again, hit that subscribe button, as I said, for MHRT Network. Have your friends tell their friends about the 5280 podcast and the MHRT Network. It has been an absolute blast, and we'll see you guys next week for another episode of the 5280 podcast.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come